But you can come take the test in costume if you like. That's okay. I don't mind.
I can come in a costume?
You can come. I may dress like a
Bouncy.
Yeah, the fawns.
Get your leather jacket out.
I'll dig out my black leather jacket.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, slick his hair back in the leather jacket. I would love to see that. Hey. That'd be awesome.
Years ago, I was told the same thing.
Oh, you
I
see?
mean, years ago.
No, I can see. I told him so he looks like you know.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I can see it.
They said that. I said, well, that's okay. That's nice.
Yeah, it's a compliment.
Okay, so anyway, muscles. If you remember from the histology lectures, there are 3 kinds of muscles, so we're kind of just reviewing. What we really concentrate on is the skeletal muscle, or the striated, or the voluntary muscle. That's what we're really going to get into. But just to review it, we have the smooth muscle, which of course is involuntary, and it's in places that you have no control over, that you don't care to have control over. You're not about to worry about your blood vessels constricting or dilating. They're going to do it automatically based on your body's needs. And your digestive system, you put the food in your mouth, it tastes good, you're happy, you're satisfied, and somewhere along the way eventually becomes feces. You don't worry about it, it just happens. You absorb nutrients, you feel good. Hey, that was great, I'm wonderful, I'm happy, and I'm healthy. And the smooth muscle lining the entire digestive tract will automatically, autonomically work to push it all through, and eventually, and next semester you get this, eventually you're going to find out how you actually did form the feces. There's a whole process for this. And basically that's it. Female reproductive tract, you've got the uterus I have on there fallopian tubes, but that's, the male has some smooth muscle, but the female reproductive tract, the uterus is like 90% smooth muscle. It's got a little lining of endometrium, and it's got an outside lining of perimetrium, but really the whole thing is smooth muscle, which is under the control of, as you saw at the beginning of the semester when we did homeostasis, under the control of oxytocin, and when the feedback gets to the hypothalamus, it secretes the oxytocin, it releases from the posterior pituitary, travels down to the uterus, and causes contractions. All this nice automatic stuff that you don't have to worry about. I mean, guys don't worry about it at all. But women who are pregnant would have to think about it, but they don't. It's all taken care of automatically, so that smooth muscle doesn't require any input on our part. Cardiac muscle, structurally like striated muscle, has the striations in it, also has those intercalated discs for conducting the electricity, desmosomes to hold it together. We do see desmosomes in other areas for keeping cells together, keeping fibers together. But also it is involuntary in that sense, and it's self-excitatory as well, which is more than we can say for the other muscles. And again, you'll get heart next semester, which will explain exactly how it works. You'll see about the sinoatrial node, the atrioventricular node, Bachman's bundle, bundle of His, the bundle branches, and Purkinje fibers, and all this stuff that conducts the electricity through all of this cardiac muscle, making the heart beat in a proper way. And we're not going to get into detail, just suffice it to say that, of course, structurally, you can see the striations on there. If you look all up and down, I mean, look at all those darker bands going through here. You can see them going up and down. Throughout every one of the fibers, there's a bunch you can really see well. And these dark lines that are intercalated discs that you don't see in striated muscle down here. So that sort of gives you an idea that you're looking at heart muscle instead of at voluntary skeletal muscle. And that's all I have to say about those two. So now we'll focus on the striated skeletal voluntary muscle. There's a slide. We saw that when we did tissues. That's a fiber. It's got multiple nuclei. Excuse me. The nuclei are all placed on the periphery of the cell being a fiber, not a cell like a cheek cell or something like that. So you got these lines, the striations. And those are the contractile portions of the fiber to get it to shorten and do work. Okay, but we will talk about eccentric contractions where the muscle lengthens and does work, which seems kind of odd. I want to lift this, my biceps is going to shorten so I can lift it, and it's doing work. Fine. So how can it possibly lengthen and still do work? We'll explain all that when we get down to contractions. Meanwhile, we name muscles in a whole bunch of different ways. Some names are absolutely not helpful at all in figuring out where the muscle is. You're going to have to, there's a nice, we've all started muscle, we've all done muscles in the lab. You see that sheet you got, that's like 50 some odd muscles on it. And it's a lot of memorization. Now, some of them are easy to understand. All right? You know exactly where to look for the muscles based on certain names. This doesn't help as much. Maximus, of course, would be something maximum in size. Medius, middle in size, and minimus, smallest in size. Well, the only muscles that come to my mind are the gluteal muscles. There's gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. Everybody knows gluteus maximus because they've been telling you for years, move your gluteus maximus. All right? I'll bet that you probably heard that first long before you learned about it in school. All right? So everybody knows that's the butt muscle. There are two others that go with it in smaller size, the minimus and the medius. Okay? And their functions are involved in moving the hip around and getting the leg up and all that kind of thing. Words like longus and brevis, where you're going to see that on muscles that you had to know for the lab, like the flexor carpi radialis longus, okay, which of course tells us a lot. You can find that as long as you know certain things which you already know, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So longus means long, obviously. Brevis means short, which of course is where the word brief comes from. Right? Keep it brief. Keep it short. Same thing. It's from the Latin word brevis, which means short. So now you've got a little Latin lesson here. Fiber direction, which also should help, particularly when you combine it with other things like the area of the body that is rotated. Fibers that are rectus fibers go up and down, parallel to the midline. There's the linea alba, the white line that's down the center that separates the left and right halves. Both of these are rectus abdominis. Okay, so rectus, you're going to be looking for fibers that go parallel to the midline, up and down. Abdominis tells me where to look. I'm not going to look on the back, I'm not going to look on the leg, I'm not going to look on the arm, I'm going to look on the abdomen. So it's easy to find a muscle with a name like rectus abdominis. Fibers that go up and down in the abdominal region. Very simple. What's your transverse? Transversus, which is Latin, or transverse in English, it's the same story. Transverse means going across, perpendicular to the midline, perpendicular to the linea alba, the white line that goes down the center. So if we're looking for a transverse abdominis or a transversus abdominis, same story. We're looking for something with fibers that are going left to right, right to left, and they're located in the abdominal region. So here they've left the rectus abdominis intact, and they've peeled back over here to show you there's the rectus on the outside. Showing you here the transverse abdominis. You can see the fibers are going left and right, perpendicular to these guys, perpendicular to that linea alba down the center. And that's basically how we name that kind. And again, it helps. You're going to see in the lab, if you haven't already looked at it, the rectus femoris. Okay, I'm looking for fibers up and down, and femoris, I'm looking for the femur area. Where do you find that? Front muscle of your leg, the anterior muscle is part of your quadricep. So names like that are not hard, they help out. Not all muscles are like that. Oblique, of course, means on an angle. So we look at the external and internal obliques, which you should have seen in the lab. Rectus would be under here, under this fascia. Transverse would be there, you have to pull away to look at it, it's deep. And then what about these? We'll look at the fiber directions. The arrows show that these fibers are not going straight up and down. They're not going straight left and right, they're on an angle. So you got your X, this is probably the external is what it needs to be here. The internal you'd have to peel some away. But the oblique, the external will go that way, the oblique will go that way, the internal will go that way, but at least they'll still be going not up and down and not left and right. So that makes them oblique. And offhand, I can't think of obliques anywhere else. No. Okay? Shape of muscle is sometimes a way that we label the muscles, that we name them. So rhomboid. Rhomboid is a diamond shape. And you're going to see, I don't have a picture of it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Right there. These, I mean, somebody considered them diamond shaped, but those are your rhomboideus majors and minors in there. Okay? And trapezoid. The green is the trapezius muscle. Now, Okay, you all know what a trapezoid is, right? It's like a rectangle that's on an angle. I never saw it, to be perfectly honest with you. That just looks like a rectangle on an angle. But I didn't name them. I'm just reporting the news. You know, don't shoot the messenger. So that's your trapezius muscle. It inserts on the occiput, comes all the way down, or it originates on the occiput, comes all the way down here to T12, the 12th thoracic vertebra, and inserts down there, and then fans out here. That white line, that's the spine of the scapula. It's so nice to be able to talk to you about all this stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Isn't that great? There's the spine of the scapula right there. Okay? And just remember, I forgot my bone box. I forget, not forget. So NASA was because I was thinking about spine and scapula. Anyway, so it goes all the way out here, and the muscles have muscle bellies. The muscle belly is the area of the muscle with the greatest innervation. Okay? So what happens is, for example, this is the muscle belly for the trapezius muscle right up here. And many of you are very intimately familiar with this, because when you get stressed out, it gets tight, like a rock. I usually call patients, friends, poke around and say, it feels like a steel-belted radial tire. Okay, so how many people get that? When they get really tense, these muscles get so sore, right? And you want somebody to come over behind you, work at it. It hurts like hell, but it's exquisite pain. It's like, yeah, just do more. It hurts, but do more. Well, there's a reason. Number one, it's tight. Number two, look at the position of the way this trapezius muscle works. It goes up in here. There are other muscles in your neck, like a splenius capitis, and your levator scapulae comes up this way. And there's a whole bunch of other muscles, and when this guy goes into spasm like that, the other muscles get affected. And one of the greatest causes, one of the most common causes of headaches is trapezius muscle spasm right there. So if you want to get rid of headaches, relax these things. So if somebody wants to come along and massage it for you, let them. Even though it's uncomfortable for a while, the headache will go away if you have one. In most cases, assuming it's not organic, that it's just being caused by these muscles. So you have to think about that. It's very important how to treat things. But this muscle is a big muscle. It goes all the way down there, and it's supposedly shaped like the trapezoid. I guess that's a question. But anyway, deltoid. Well, we only have two deltoids in the body, left and right. And delta, the Greek letter delta, is a triangle, capital delta, it's like that. So this is a triangular shaped muscle. And if you look at it, it is. There it is right there. Looking rather triangular. Okay, and that's the muscle here where you get your injection. And it doesn't tell us anything as far as naming. Shape-wise, yeah, but it doesn't tell me where it is. I mean, you have to know where it is. It's easy, because it's easy to remember, because it's the only deltoid muscle in the body. But nevertheless, name-wise, it really went by its shape, but it doesn't give us an idea of where anything is. Serratus muscle, something like that. Now, a serrated knife is a steak knife with a scalloped edge like that. Okay? So, the serratus muscle here, serratus anterior, this guy right here, you'll see that in the lab, they're not on those little guys, on the little heads, but they are on the three trunks that are over on the window. Okay, and there's a serratus posterior also, but you can't see that. But the anterior, you can't miss. All these little fingers. So these aren't actually, I mean, they're individual bundles, if you will, but they all are part of the same muscle. They go all the way around. That's the serratus anterior. It looks like a scalloped edge, like these little finger-like projections. So that's easy to find. And of course, anterior, serratus anterior, you're going to look at the front part of the body for something that's scalloped, and that's what it is there. Stick. So yeah, there's a big better same picture right there. Okay. Origins and insertions. You don't have to memorize these things. I'm just giving you an idea how easy it is in some muscles like this to find them. All right? Now, the sternothyroid. Well, clearly it originates on the sternum. And it inserts, all muscles have an origin, an insertion, and an action, or many actions. It inserts, can't insert on the thyroid gland, nothing inserts on the gland. It inserts on the thyroid cartilage, okay, which is where your Adam's apple is. The laryngeal prominence is the ridge in the front of the thyroid cartilage. So that your larynx is basically the front of the thyroid cartilage. So this muscle begins on the sternum and inserts up on the thyroid cartilage. The sternohyoid, you know the hyoid bone, that U-shaped thing, they had a wire onto the skeleton because it doesn't attach to anything. this obviously, excuse me, starts on the sternum, inserts on the hyoid bone. The stylohyoid, now that's another interesting one, easy to find. You're not responsible for that. Actually, you're not responsible for the two. I don't think it's not on this. But the stylo, remember the temporal bone has two styloid processes here, one on each side, those little pointy things. There's a muscle that actually attaches there and originates on that and runs right through here and goes to your hyoid bone. Little skinny thing, right in there. Okay? But it's there, and the hyoid bone is involved in movement of your tongue, all the muscles that are attached to the hyoid. Because the hyoid doesn't articulate with anything. It's floating, it's right here. You can move it back and forth because it's not attached to anything. Does this upset you? I can see that you shook your head and said, look down. Didn't want to see me moving my hyoid bone. But it moves because it's not articulating with anything. However, it's attached by a whole load of muscles. The stylohyoid, the omohyoid, the mylohyoid, the stylohyoid, I said that already, the sternohyoid. There's all these muscles that hold on to it, and that's how you move your tongue, because all these muscles are attached to that, moving your tongue. So it's a very important little bone. All right, it's easy to figure out. I actually pulled my I didn't tell you this story. I pulled my stylohyoid muscle. I was yawning. That was it. And all of a sudden, I feel this horrendously sharp pain. Thin little line of pain right here. I knew damn well. I said, I just pulled my stylohyoid. Because you could feel it right from the styloid process there, right into the hyoid bone. It feels a little tiny bit. It's a skinny little nothing. And I was like petrified because I said, this pain is excruciating. Is this going to last like hours? I'll die. You know, I'll be running and looking for some painkiller. Went away in 10 seconds. I don't know how I did it. Just yawning. Yawning not been my friend. We talked about TMJ. I talked about that. Sophomore year of college, right? I talked that I went to school in Jersey and I commuted to the Bronx. So, sophomore English. I don't know how you people talked about sophomore English. I didn't think this was exciting. And I was bored. I couldn't close my mouth because my TMJ went out just from yawning. And okay, so I finished class and I had to drive back to the Bronx. So I didn't. So people driving next to me, they looked in and I sit like this. So in those days, you could actually go to your doctor without an appointment. So he was a block away from my house. I walked into the office like this, and I told this nurse, I said, look, I can't close my mouth. So I think she left. They got me right in a few minutes, and I walked into the doctor and look, are you on in class? I can't. And he left. I remember him laughing for sure. And he said, oh, just go home. This was a block. I walked home. He says, go home and put a hot compress on your jaw and take a couple of aspirin if it hurts. That's about it. And he was right. I put the heat on it. I was able to close it. That was great. Then over the years, my TMJ kept slipping out. So I'd wake up in the morning. I must have slept like this. And it was like this. No, but I know what to do. And I adjusted my own jaw. And it worked. I got it back. So then I had to walk around talking like this. Because the minute I opened my mouth, it went out again. So like for a whole day, I talked like this. And, I was lecturing. And, sorry, kids, I really can't open my mouth to speak. And finally, I just outgrew it, which was interesting. But yeah, so it's all these muscles in here that operate your jaw and stuff. And you're going to learn all these. I mean, you're responsible for the masseter and the temporalis, which works the jaw, and the pterygoids are on your list. And who else? We don't do the digastrics. Buccinator, those guys. That's all in here, and that all helps to operate. Buccinator doesn't do much. That does the cheek. But all those other ones operate your jaw. So, it could go out. Anyway, back to this. The sternomastoid goes from the sternum to the mastoid process of the temporal. And then there's the sternocleidomastoid, which is an interesting muscle. That's this strappy one right here when you turn your head. It's got two origins, unlike everything else that has only one. The sternocleido, sternum and clavicle. Cleido is the clavicle. So it's got an origin here and an origin here, and then they fuse together into this one muscle and one insertion into the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So, some of these are really easy to figure out. If you had to find these muscles, you could do it in a second. Now that you know all the bones that they're attached to, you can easily find them based on this naming system. Number of heads
Get the memory side.
is another thing, you know, biceps, triceps, quadriceps. This is bi means 2, tri means 3, quadra means 4. So basically, the heads refer to the origins. Right? Biceps, we have 2 biceps in the body. The biceps brachii, which brachium means arm. So the biceps brachii is obviously this one. And then you got in your hamstrings a biceps femoris. So it's going to be a 2-headed muscle near the femur. And that's it. We don't have any other biceps in the body. And they're properly named. They do have 2 heads, 2 origins. So that works out okay. Triceps, there's only one. Triceps brachii, that's it. The one back here that extends your arm. Okay, it has three origins up in here, 3 parts, and insertion down here. The quadriceps is a fun one. Now that means 4 heads. Now your quad muscles are your anterior thigh muscles, right? Vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, and rectus femoris. That's your 4 quad muscles. But that's 4 separate muscles, and if you look at the list you got in the lab, it shows you they have different origins and different insertions. Insertions are pretty much the same, but different origins and even slightly different functions, each one individually. So how do you call that a quadriceps? It's 4. They got 4 names. That's what they've done. They put it together, even though it really isn't one muscle. You do have a muscle you're not responsible for on that list. And it's kind of an obscure muscle, so that's why you're not. But it is one single muscle with 4 heads, and it's right here. It's called the quadriceps labii superioris. Okay? Quadriceps, 4 heads. Labii, labia are lips. Superioris, upper. Superior, not inferior. So you know, if you had to look for it, you'd say, I'm looking for a muscle up in here above the upper lip that has 4 heads, 4 origins in it, but 1 muscle. And that's it. It is 1 muscle with 4 origins along here. So it's a true quadriceps muscle. And offhand, I can't think of another quad muscle in the body. But nevertheless, they still consider this thing in your thigh the quad. So that's 4 sort of 4 heads, 4 muscles. All right, so what about functions? Now there are names in muscles about function for the muscle, and some of them, again, are helpful. Others, the muscle doesn't tell you, like deltoid doesn't tell you it's an abductor. All right, you just have to learn that and memorize it because it's not in the name. It just says deltoid. It's based on shape. Where is it? I don't even know where it is. You know, what does it do? You got to learn it. That's part of the problem in anatomy is a lot of rote memorization. All right, can't do much more than that. You got to memorize this stuff. Okay, so functions. Well, it's easy. Flexor. If in the name of it, the word flexor appears, you know that it's on a particular surface that's going to flex something. So certainly if it's your arm, your elbow, your fingers, it's got to be on the anterior surface. All flexion on this here is this way. It's all the anterior side. Extensor opens up. Flexors close an ankle, extensors open an ankle. Okay? Of course, when you get to the foot, that's a little different. So extensors are going to be this way, opening up your arm or extending your fingers that way. So that's going to be on the dorsum of your arm. Remember, in the anatomical position, this is the anterior or ventral surface, and this is the posterior surface of the arm. So you know that extension is going to be back there, and flexion is going to be here, but you certainly don't close an angle in this direction, you're opening it. Okay? Foot's funny. Foot doesn't have any extension at all. It only flexes in 2 directions. All right? There's the neutral position, and it's very hard to do with the hand because the hand doesn't go back much further than that on the wrist. So I'm making believe it's a foot. All right? Neutral position would be like that, standing up. Dorsum of the foot. The dorsum is the back of the foot. So when your tibialis anterior muscle contracts and tibialis posterior, the tendons go under the foot from those muscles. And I assume you've all looked at the tibialis anterior and posterior by now. I think, is the posterior on the list? I don't remember. I don't think so. The anterior is definitely. The anterior is definitely. They do the same thing. The posterior is just behind the tibia, and they come down, and the 2 tendons come under the foot like this. So, and when that muscle contracts, the 2 tendons are pulling up on the foot. So they're dorsiflexing the foot, bringing the toes towards the head. Dorsiflexion, because that's the dorsum of the foot. All right? When your calf muscles, your gastrocnemius and your soleus contract, they go down. Where do your calf muscles attach? What's the insertion of your calf muscles? Gastrocnemius and soleus. Where are they located? Where? Behind where? Behind your tibia. So where are they inserting? The most famous tendon in the whole world.
Achilles.
Achilles, and that inserts into? It's also known as the blank tendon? Listen, I gotta go out and get something. The calcaneal tendon. And you all know where the calcaneus is, right? It should heal. Okay, so, this being a foot, this being the calf muscles, they're inserting into the calcaneus. When they pull, the foot goes down, but it's not extension. The sole is the plantar surface of your foot. So in this movement like that, anybody do ballet? Ever? No? Nobody did ballet? You did, okay. And when you know that when you put your leg out, you was not supposed to keep your toes pointing up, you were supposed to point your toes out that way. Sort of like your leg and foot were going straight in one line. That's plantar flexion. So you have dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, but it's not flexion and extension. Even though it is really an extension, putting your foot out like that and making it straight, it's really not considered that. So the foot never extends. It dorsiflexes, neutral, or plantar flexion. Right? So it's a little different there. You got two kinds of flexion on the foot. It makes it a little different. So when you talk about flexor, you know, and you have muscles that flex, although I don't think you're responsible for any of them. But you got to know which is which. Obviously, we know that tibialis anterior is for dorsiflexion of the foot, and the calf muscles are for plantar flexion. Extensors, as I say, open the ankle at a joint, but we don't have that on the foot. Abductors and adductors. Abduct means to take away. So if in the name of a muscle the word abductor appears, you know that it's going to move it away from the midline of the body. Now, it turns out function-wise, although it doesn't help us find it or name it, the deltoid muscle is an abducting muscle. So what does it do? It takes your arm and moves it away from the midline. It's an abductor. Okay, other muscles that you have also not named adductor are moving it in. You do have, though, I think you're responsible for the adductor magnus. Is that on your list? So if you abducted your hip out this way to bring it back in, you're going to use your adductor magnus longus brevis. Okay, you're not responsible for all of them, but whatever one I can, just the magnus is on it. So that's an adducting muscle. It brings it to the center. Now, the gracilis, which I know is on, it doesn't tell me anything. Gracilis, I wouldn't know where to look if I didn't know where it is. This is where the memorization comes in. The gracilis, thigh muscle in here, okay? The gracilis is an adductor muscle by function, but it doesn't help you with its name because it's called the gracilis. You'll get a chuckle out of this. The gracilis muscle has a nickname, the protector of virginity. Its job is to bring the legs close together. And that's why they nicknamed it that. And you'll never
That's
forget.
AD
It's like anything having to do with section. I know I told my lab about
Yeah.
the saying
No,
three
this is the
phones.
AB and the
I didn't do it
AB
here,
sounds
did I?
like-
Yeah.
I did do it here, okay, because I know I told the lab. So I did do it, I gave it to the city Nassau yesterday. And they, oh, right on the board, right on the board. I gave it, right? Some lovers try positions that they can't. You remember that in sex? All right, wait, did I tell you about the old one when they changed the name? The scaphoid was a navicular, and the trapezium and trapezoid were the greater and lesser multangulars. I didn't tell you this story. So they had different, there was an N instead of an S, and there were two M's instead of trapezium and trapezoid. Okay? So it changed the sentence. You couldn't use that. So the other one was never lower Tilly's pants. Mother may come home. Mother May was the greater and lesser multangular, and never was the navicular instead of the scaphoid. So there's always something related to sex. It works. I have yet to hear one, or I've had students try and make one up. You know what the problem is? They're not, these are nice. 2 rows of 4, you know, radius to ulna, it's simple, they're straight. With the ankle, they're all over the place. You got the talus above the calcaneus, you got the navicular in front of the talus, you got the 3 cuneiforms, and then 1 cuboid on it, you know, it's difficult. So yeah, I have yet to come up with one myself, just because what direction, how are you going? Do you go down this way forward, then to the right, then back across? Do you go down this way forward, go from the left to the right? It's like, yeah. But I suppose if you came up with one, then you memorize it, say this is the way I'm going. Just like you remember that when you do these 8, it's from thumb to pinky, thumb to pinky. So, you know, if you can come up with one, you know, it would be the extra points. But it's got to be really good. You can't just make a nonsense sound. The others made sense. Anyway, and of course, if it's associated with sex, that would be even better because then everybody will remember it. Okay. Anyway, so tensor. There's only one tensor muscle in the body. And again, it doesn't really help you unless you recognize what it is. There's a tensor fasciolata, you know, that was on your list. Lateral thigh muscle. The muscle's only this big on the leg model, and even on us, it's only about that big. But the fasciolata means wide fascia. There's that whole strip, the iliotibial band, it's called. The iliotibial band, or iliotibial tract, depends on whose book you're reading. Ilium to the tibia. Right? It inserts, goes down the lateral aspect of the leg right below the muscle. So the muscle attaches that way to the side of the tibia, to the lateral aspect of the tibia. And basically, it's a tensor muscle. You can tighten it up. There it is, did. And you can feel it get really tight as you put your finger on it. Of course, it does help with, you know, a little abduction. But you know, that's the only tensor muscle in the whole body. Doesn't tell you anything about where it is. It just says tensor fasciolata. So you're going to look for a tensor muscle that tenses things up and has a big piece of fascia on it. And that's the only one that really has such a large piece of fascia, as I say, the iliotibial band or tract. Levators elevate something. Well, that sounds like it, yeah.
Going back to your gluteus thing, that's AB, Doc, right? When you said it.
Oh, the gluteus, yeah, they have.
They
They don't bring it.
Okay.
You can do, and they also extend the thigh, because you can feel if you put your hand on your glute and then move, you can feel it tighten up.
Yeah.
So it's extension, flexion, you know, that's, well, the list has everything, but yeah, it does several things.
The flexion's on the front part of the interior part of the leg, right? Flexion.
Boots?
No, for the leg, because you said it also does the back.
Well, if
so
you're
it's like-
flexing like, if you put your hand there, you can feel it tighten up. Does a
Okay.
little bit of that, but mainly no, not so much that. It's more of this extension and
More of a AB dog.
rotation, yeah.
Okay.
Does several things. Anyway, so levators, elevate, lift. So the only, well, there's two. There's also, besides the quad, there's a levator labii superioris. Okay? Obviously, that tells you everything. You're not responsible for it, but it gives you an idea of what it is. There's the one that you are responsible for, I think it's on your list, the levator scapulae, isn't that on your list? So, obviously, we know where to look for that. The scapula, levator scapula, it's gonna lift your scapula. I can do it on my right side, I'm not taking my shirt off. But right now, I don't know, can you see it through the sweater?
Yes.
That, I can't do the left one. I've never been able to. I mean, I lift my shoulder, but that's not, but without lifting the shoulder, I can do this with the, there was a wrestler years ago, a guy named Karl von Hess was his name. And wrestling, you know, anybody ever watch wrestling? Like, on a regular
Like
basis?
what, WWE?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. You know, it's all like acting.
Mhm.
These guys jump off the top rope with their knee and they hit the guy in the head, and he's like, and then 2 seconds later he gets up and throws them over the rope. You know, come on, right? Do that to somebody that would be out cold dead. But so it was fake back then. But this guy Karl von Hess, he had control over both of them, and he could elevate and depress his scapula. So he'd come out there, you know, they're wearing shirts, right? He comes out there and he'd do this to scare his opponent. His shoulder blades would go up and down like this. It was amazing. That's amazing. Anyway, depressor is lower something, okay? Offhand, one of the muscles I can think of offhand is a depressor mandibuli. Well, clearly we know what that does, right? Yep, you got it. It depresses your jaw, okay? Pronate and supinate. To be prone means to be face down, okay? To be supine means to be face up. So body-wise, if you're in the supine position, it's easy to remember. If you don't remember which is which, supine means you're lying on your spine. Okay, so if you remember that, okay, if I'm lying on my spine, I'm face up, therefore that's supine is face up, anterior face up. With your hand, which really we do the pronation and supination, you don't really pronate and supinate other parts of your body. So this would be supination, and on your list is the supinator muscle, and then making it prone is the pronator teres for one. Okay, so that helps to do that. So we do this kind of rotation, and we talked about it with the bones. You know that joint-wise, we said the ginglymus joint, the hinge joint for the ulna, wrapped around the trochlea, the trochlea notch wrapped around the trochlea. Okay? So you notice if you put your finger on your olecranon process here, and you pronate, supinate, you're gonna feel that bone ain't going nowhere. Because that elbow joint is strictly a flexor, extensor, strictly a hinge, a Gingham's joint. No matter how much of this you do, that ulna is not moving. It better not be, because if it is, it's dislocating. That wraparound of the semilunar, the trochlea notch around the trochlea of the humerus is very stable, and there's a lot of ligaments that help stabilize it. You got medial and lateral. Radial and ulnar, they call it. I mean, well, it's the same thing, but a radial and ulnar collateral ligament, which is really still medial and lateral. They like to differentiate it from the medial and lateral on the knees, so they call radial and ulnar. And in the anatomical position, the radial is the lateral. Maybe your thumb is out there. So radial collateral, ulnar collateral, and then there's a transverse ligament that goes in there. So, you know, there's good support in the elbow, and it doesn't go anywhere. So pronation and supination is really the radius rolling over the ulna, because the radius can roll around very nicely. You have three joints in your elbow. You have a hinge joint, and you have some trochoids, some rotating joints, pivot joints. The head of the radius under the capitulum, like that. And then you've got the joints between the radius and the ulna, where the radial head fits into the radial notch on the ulna. Down at the bottom, the ulnar head fits into the ulnar notch on the radius. You got all that taking place just to do this. So it works out very nicely. Anyway, so supination, pronation. Rotator, well, there's really no rotator muscle in the body. Nothing called the rotator blank. There's the rotator cuff. All right, you saw that in the lab when you took out that little scapular model with the muscles on it. Okay, I assume your lab teachers told you that it was what the rotator cuff was, did they? Yes? No? Well, I'll tell you. If you were in my lab, you would have heard. The rotator cuff is made up of four muscles, sits. S-I-T-S, sits. So it's easy to remember. Okay, what does S-I-T-S stand for? The supraspinatus, the one in the supraspinous fossa, which isn't on your list. Should be. Is the fossa on the list?
No.
No, the fossa is not. The muscle is. So all these muscles, all five muscles on the shoulder blade are there. They're on the list. But the problem is, I would have put the supraspinous fossa, the infraspinous fossa, and the subscapular fossa on your scapular list, because you got to know the muscles anyway. So if you already knew the fossa, you'd know the muscles that fit into it. So anyway, the supraspinatus is above the spinous in that little fossa, the infraspinatus in the larger portion under the spine, the subscapularis on the anterior surface of the scapula, and underneath you got the two teres muscles, the teres minor first and the major below that. The major is not involved. The minor is. So SITS is supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, sits. And that's how you remember the rotator cuff. So that is involved in rotating, okay, from all those muscles here. In fact, if you put your fingers on it, you can feel as you're rotating, they're tightening up and loosening up depending on what position you're in. You can't feel your subscapularis, sorry. You have to remove everything and go to the front of your scapula, which is kind of hard to do when you're alive. So yeah, but the other three you can feel. And that's what you're going to move. So something tears, depending on how much injury, in the rotator cuff. Usually, of course, when you do something like throw a ball. I had a patient who was a police officer for Garden City, and he was on their Garden City Police softball team, third base. And he got a slow roller, and he threw like a son of a gun, like a cannon to get to first base to beat the guy. He did. And that night he came into my office. I'm having trouble moving my arm. I said, what'd you do? I threw this really wicked ball from third base to first base to get the runner. I said, did you get him, please? He says, yeah. I said, checked him out. I said, go see your orthopedist. I think he got a torn rotator cuff. And sure enough, he had an MRI, and nothing I could do for him. He didn't have, I don't think they did anything. I think they just immobilized him and let him rest, and weeks off from the police department, and he was happy with that. But yeah, so that's your rotator. I mean, it's just a series. It spins around an axis. And it is, but it's really four muscles together. We don't have any muscle called the rotator blank. So, but it's at least naming things. Now, what about position? Well, that's easy. Superficial obviously means near the surface. So you do have muscles that are superficialis, which is Latin for superficial. Profundus is deep. So if it ends in that, you're looking deeper in. That's where the word profound comes from. Okay, wow, that's deep. That's profound. Well, yeah, so is the muscle that's deeper in. Medialis and lateralis. Well, again, the middle of the body is medialis, and the outside is lateralis, and of course the easiest one that you've already looked at is the vastus. The vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, parts of the quads. Okay, and they are just that. You've got your rectus femoris. Okay, there's rectus and near the femur, and on either side of it are the vastus lateralis and medialis, and then intermedius is in between. And of course, on the models, if you want to see the vastus intermedius, you pop off the rectus femoris, and you look and you see mainly a lot of fascia. It's kind of white and gray there. It's not so red like the rest of the muscles, but that's the way the muscle's built. It's got a lot of fascia. So that's the intermedius between the vastus lateralis and medialis. This intermediate. And that's your four muscles for the quad. Now, as I said, tendons connect muscles to bones. Okay, we talked about that when we did bones, I think. The periosteum around the bone, that connective tissue layer that's involved in helping nourish the muscles, the bones rather, that layer that anchors the blood vessels and the nerves coming in and out. That's what periosteum is. And of course, we already talked about bone stress. So when the muscle contracts and when it pulls on the tendon and the tendon pulls on the periosteum to avoid one of those avulsion fractures that we looked at last week, where we pull a piece of bone off, the bone has bone stress, and it strengthens itself a little bit every time you use a muscle. Now, obviously, the more you use it and the heavier the load, the more stress you're going to get, and the bone will get stronger. I mean, yes, would your muscles in your forearm get stronger just by doing this? Of course they would, but there's not much of a load here. The load is just your arm. That's it, the weight of your arm. If I had a 10-pound weight and I was doing this all the time, exercising every day, I'd get more bone stress because lifting 10 pounds is a lot harder than lifting just my arm. Okay, nevertheless, there's some strain, some stress on the bone from doing this, although it's not great. So anything, what do they say? Get an empty milk container, a gallon, fill it with water, and use that. That's a good exercise. It's cheap. It's free. Once you use up the milk, you got. Hey, what am I going to do with this? I'll put it out for the recycle. Yeah, well, if you want to save it, clean it up, fill it with water, and use it as a weight. Water weighs 1 gram per ml. So that's a gallon. That's 128 ounces. And 30 mLs. 2 pounds. That's a lot. It's like 400, 500 grams. It's a good pound and a half, 2 pounds maybe of water. But you put something else in, like liquid mercury. Mercury is liquid at room temperature. That would really weigh a lot. Or if you get some lead. But anyway, so you got just a few pounds in a gallon of water. So it's good exercise. It's not super heavy. You're not going to die. But if you use it, it's a good load on the muscles, and that'll build the muscles up. Because muscles work best under a load, and they build better under a load. Now, back please. Oh, and I know, I have to remove the damn thing, right? It shuts down. Yeah, I guess. We'll just do that. Anyway, while I'm talking, muscles, when you build up muscles, you exercise, right? And you lift weights, or you do something, pull against weights, or something like that. Or even running, which is fine, that's moving you as a load. The muscle, did you ever stretch to stretching? That's important. You have to stretch, because the muscles get kind of tight and tense, and if you stretch, you relax them. So it's really good, actually. So feel free to, anytime, just raise your hands and do that. That's great. So you need that. Otherwise, you get really stiff. It's not comfortable. And you can't sit and listen. Then it's like, I gotta get up. Anyway, there are a couple of things in life. Hyperplasia and hypertrophy. Why isn't hyperplasia or hypertrophy? Anyway, hypertrophy or hyperplasia. Hyperplasia means putting more cells in. Tumors are an example of hyperplasia. Cancerous stuff is hyperplasia. You're putting more cells. Hypertrophy means increasing the size of something, but not increasing the number. Now your muscles are a bunch of fibers, okay? And we've talked about that, they're long, and that's the cell, with multinuclei at the periphery of the cell. When you exercise your muscles, all you do is increase their size. You make them hypertrophic. But that's normal, it's natural hypertrophy. You can have other things that aren't good. In the reproductive system, the prostate gland in males, there's a condition known as benign prostatic hypertrophy. Not uncommon in older guys. It's benign, it's not cancerous, but enlargement of the prostate actually gives them it doesn't really hurt or anything, but it gives them trouble peeing, because as you'll learn when we go into the repro or the urinary system next semester, the bladder, the urinary bladder has a urethra that bleeds. Females just have a short one, that's it. Males have a long one, goes all the way down and then comes out and ends up outside at the end of the penis at the urethral orifice. It goes through the prostate gland, which is right under the bladder. So if the prostate enlarges as the urethra's there, it kind of squeezes on it, and it makes it difficult to urinate. You know, it's a problem. But that's benign hypertrophy. It's enlarging the prostate, but it's not causing any new cells to grow, so it's not cancer. Muscles do the same thing. When you exercise, if you have 10,000 fibers to a muscle, you still have 10,000 fibers. They're just bigger after you exercise. And this is why if you don't continue to exercise after you've done a lot, you get flabby. Because those cells kind of like shrink back somewhat, but they've been stretched out, so the muscle's not quite what it used to be. That doesn't mean you got it well. I exercised and I looked great when I was 30 and 40. Now I'm 90. I better have continued exercising for the last 50 years. Otherwise I'm going to look like a bag of bones, you know. It doesn't have to happen. There was a guy named Jack LaLanne. Anybody ever hear of Jack LaLanne? Jack LaLanne died in his 90s. He had an exercise show back in the 50s. He'd get there in the morning. Okay, everybody, let's stand in front of the TV set. Let's do this and that. And he was one of the healthiest guys. He used to pull railroad cars with his teeth. They set them up and he actually, I don't know how he did not break his teeth. But, you know, he did all these crazy things and I'll show you how strong I am. Anyway, he stayed in great shape even into his 90s. We hypertrophy. Our muscles undergo hypertrophy. Hypertrophy when you exercise. So it would be like if each of us was a muscle fiber. Okay, there's just a limited number of us in this room. Now we go out for a month and we eat like pigs. We all come back together after that month. There's still the same number of us, but we're all twice the size. Okay, we've all become hypertrophic because we ate like pigs. Didn't change numbers though. So that's not hyperplasia. There's no new members in the classroom, just a bunch of fat ones. Well, the muscle cells do the same thing. They become hypertrophic when you exercise. Oh, go back. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. So at any rate, that's how muscles enlarge, and that's what exercise does for you. It enlarges the cells themselves, doesn't add any new numbers to it. Okay, now, one of the problems we face is, I think you remember I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, that muscle cells and nerve cells and red blood cells do not undergo mitosis. So what happens if a muscle cell, and it's a living cell, all right, so as such, if it gets damaged, it can repair itself. If the damage is too far gone beyond repair, that muscle cell is going to die. Now, it's not going to be replaced by a new cell because nobody's undergoing mitosis. So if you lose enough cells in an area, and you lose the ability of that area to function, we do have one little thing, and I'm going to talk about these things in a second. Satellite cells. Satellite cells are cells associated with muscle. They're kind of dormant. But if they need to, if the muscle gets damaged and the cells are dead, we can get some of these satellite cells to undergo mitosis once, and then they fill in the gap. So if you do a small enough, there's not an even number. If you had 10,000 fibers going to a muscle, you wouldn't have 10,000 satellite cells. You have fewer. So they can replace a certain amount. If you damage too much, they're not going to. And then if you damage too much and the cells are dead, you get replaced with scar tissue, fat and fibrous connective tissue. And that doesn't have these five qualifications, these qualities, these characteristics of muscle cells. All right? So what are these characteristics? First one is contractility. And that's just that. The muscle can contract and do work. Shortens and does work. Now that's the standard definition. As I said, I'm going to show you tomorrow, not Thursday, how a muscle can lengthen and do work. So, and it's contracting while it lengthens. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever because it's very easy to figure out, well here, I'm going to contract the biceps, make it shorter. I mean, you measure it, there it is right there. And if I do this and pull the arm up, now it's only this big. Before it was this big. So clearly it shortened and did work. Lifting the arm up or lifting an object in the hand, that's fine. We'll explain to you next time how muscles can actually lengthen and still do work. We'll get to that. Elasticity. Muscles, elastic means stretching and going back to your original size and shape. A rubber band is an elastic band. You stretch it out, you let go, and it goes back to. Always demonstrate. Bring gadgets. There's a rubber band. Ooh, look at that. There it is, back to where it was when it started. Your muscles do the same thing. They can stretch and go back to their original size and shape. Conductivity. Now, we'll talk about muscle contraction, not today. Talk about innervation. We haven't done the nervous system, although we did talk about nerve tissue, and that gives you an inkling as to what's going on. If you're talking about a neurotransmitter, a nerve, right? We talked about that, and the nerve, the terminal buttons that have little vesicles inside with a neurotransmitter chemical in there, and the synapse, the chemical comes out. We went into this, right? We talked about tissue. Chemical comes out, the neurotransmitter comes out, fills the synapse, the impulse can jump across and do something. If it's going to a muscle, they have a motor end plate. It's not dendrites on a nerve, it's a motor end plate. It still has the same receptors on it for the neurotransmitter. With muscles, it's always acetylcholine. Now, we also have acetylcholine in the brain, you got serotonin in the brain, you got norepinephrine in the brain, you got dopamine in the brain. There's a lot of stuff. But with muscles, it's always just acetylcholine. Okay? And we'll talk more about that when we get to the nervous system and also about muscle contraction. There are receptors on the motor end plate for acetylcholine. A nerve, a motor neuron, okay, an efferent nerve, is going to get to the synapse, release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine into the synapse. The impulse jumps across, and there are receptors for acetylcholine on the motor end plate. It's going to jump across, the muscle is going to contract. It has to conduct, as it says, conductivity. It has to conduct that electrical impulse, that nerve impulse, that action potential through the muscle so that the muscle contracts. Okay? So muscles have to have that. Again, scar tissue doesn't have it. So if you replace a large amount of muscle with scar tissue, you're going to lose some of the function of that muscle.
This happens with skeletal muscle or just?
Basically skeletal.
Oh.
Yeah, cardiac is a problem. People who have a heart attack and survive. You cut off the blood supply by putting a clot into one of the coronary arteries, and anything distal to that clot, the muscle's dying because it becomes ischemic and hypoxic and anoxic and doesn't get any oxygen at all, and the tissue dies and it can't undergo mitosis. So that area of that ventricle, let's say, for the sake of argument, is not going to function properly because now it's scar tissue. And the scar tissue has none of these properties. And again, because it didn't undergo mitosis.
I have another question. How does a cramp happen? A muscle cramp?
Muscle cramps are muscle spasms.
Oh, okay.
We'll talk more about that when we get to contractions. So that'll be the next lecture for details. But generally, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for it, and I'll explain it. But generally, what happens, my ENT is right, I am a vocal abuser for sure. And my daughter would shoot me. I should bring a big bottle of water. That's what he told me. That's what she's a vocal coach too. So she says, drink, you don't drink it. He bought herself this big metal thing. It's like this big and about this big around. She fills it with water and drinks it throughout the day. Yeah, like that. It's a little different, but it's the same size. So that's what I should be doing. I should be drinking. But then I'd be, excuse me, I have to run to the bathroom now. Anyway, so yeah, muscle spasms are merely contractions of the muscle that don't give up. That's a spasm. And there are lots of reasons for it. And when we talk about muscle contraction, it will become clear. Everything will be revealed. Okay, and also reasons, pathological reasons for muscle contractions, muscle spasms as well. We'll get into it. Okay, so at any rate, irritability or excitability means that the muscle can respond to a stimulus, the stimulus being the action potential, the electrical impulse that allows the muscle to contract. So it has to do that. Again, scar tissue doesn't have this. And lastly, extensibility, stretch without damage. Well, yeah, you can stretch to a point. You know, I can stretch all the way like this. You were just stretching before. You were stretching before. You know, and it feels good. You know, it's nice because when you stretch a muscle, it actually relaxes. There's a stretch reflex, a Golgi tendon reflex, that are responsible for getting the muscle not to overstretch, but to relax and not get into spasm. And that's why stretching feels good, because it sends a neurological signal back to the brain and says, let's relax that muscle. And it does, to a point. You know, unless there's a pathology, or there's a constant irritation, or, you know, it wasn't enough to relax, or relaxes for a short period of time and it happens again. But stretching is good. Now, there is a limit. How many people saw, what is it? Night at the Museum? Okay, you remember Genghis Khan and his men? What did they like to do to people? Grab them by each one of the limbs and pull in 4 directions, right? Can you stretch him? Kiki, Miki, you know, a little bit. Anyway, yeah, you can't do that. All right, to a point, yeah. But after a while, it's like, and then there was the old torture thing, the rack, back in the medieval days. They put you on there and they stretched you out. So if you saw, what was it, Princess Bride? Maybe you saw that. They put him on the rack and he screams, you hear him all over the neighborhood there. Anyway, yeah, you can. I mean, there's a limit to the stretching. I can vouch for that personally. I was never put on the rack, and Genghis Khan and I never met. I'm not that old. But I used to in the old days, before I finally could afford it, used to change my own oil on my car. And I don't have a lift. So I have to lie on the ground and reach under. I don't know if anybody here knows how to change oil. There's a pan, and the pan has a bolt. And you undo the bolt, put a little tray under, you attach the oil, and you put the bolt back and pour your new oil in. Well, in order to get to the bolt, and I had these big wagons, and it wasn't a little short car, I'd have to lie there and reach with my wrench and get the bolt and do it. And I'm stretching like this, and all of a sudden I get this burning, sharp pain right in here in the pecs because I overstretch. There's a certain amount of extensibility, you know, without damage. Yeah, well, when you go too far, it's like, you know. So obviously there's a limit, but the muscles can stretch to a point and not get damaged. Like I said, if you do this, it's not hurting at all. It feels good, and when you're done, it feels like, that's relaxed. That's because you use that stretch reflex and get it to relax. Okay, we got 5 minutes. Muscle cells, depends on whose book you read, 100 or more nuclei, or at least many, many nuclei. Okay? This is probably one of the reasons why they don't undergo mitosis. If you remember, mitosis is directed by the nucleus. Okay, so if you have 100, it's like too many. I don't want to do that now. I'll do it later. Well, I want to do it now. Well, I'm going to do it next week. So they can't get their act together, and the muscles don't undergo mitosis. Right? But the nuclei function otherwise to run the cell. As it says, if damage beyond repair, as I pointed out before, we've got these satellite cells. All right? And this is all about satellite cells here. So as it says, they're quiescent, mononucleated, myogenic. Myogenic means creating muscle. And mononucleated, they only have one nucleus, which is why they can undergo mitosis, because they don't have to coordinate it with multinuclei. Right? So they will undergo mitosis. All right? They're located, as it says, between the sarcolemma. Now, that doesn't mean anything. We haven't gone into the structure of the cell. The sarcolemma is just a fancy, sarco is Greek for muscle. The sarcolemma is merely the muscle cell membrane, okay, the plasma membrane. They just call it a sarcolemma in a muscle, okay? And we'll talk much more about it when we talk about contraction. And the basal membrane of the terminally differentiated muscle fibers. So these are the fibers that are now differentiated at the end. Normally quiescent. So quiescent, if you remember we did the cell cycle, and we said that you go around, you got G1S, G2, but some cells go off to G0 right after they form from mitosis. That's these guys. That's quiescent, G0, off on the side. And they just sit there unless you need them. These are the cells now that go back into the cycle so they can undergo mitosis and form muscle cells. So they're quiescent normally until they're needed, right? They're reserved population of cells, of muscle cells, and it says proliferate in response to injury and give rise to regenerated muscle and more satellite cells. Because you do get some more, so you can replace muscle, but if you have too much, it just isn't going to happen. That's why some people lose some function in a muscle from repetitive stress injury to a muscle, because you keep irritating the same area, and the satellite cells finally give up. There's not enough of them, they die off, and that's the end of it. So even though they do regenerate some, If they were permanent, you'd never lose muscle tissue. Say, hey, this is great. You know, I damaged it, but it'll come back. Give them satellite cells a chance. Well, it doesn't work that way forever. So they do stop eventually. Okay? Number of markers expressed by satellite cells, evidence that satellite cells have long been presumed to be a homogeneous population of stem cells, but they're not. All right? They may not be the same. So muscle stem cells will say, well, just keep giving rise to muscle. Well, that's why it doesn't do forever, because they're not completely the same. And it just gives you this whole explanation of what they are. It says they're not even sure. They may be derived from primitive stem cell, maybe a more primitive stem cell, but they're not 100% sure. Anyway, the precursors, you know, used to repair and regenerate muscle, which is what I was just telling you. If they're all exhausted, the dead muscle cells are replaced by fat and fibrous connective tissue. That's the scarring of the muscle. So once they're all gone, that's the end of it. And we call that muscle atrophy. That's true atrophy. And we'll talk more about true atrophy versus the misnomer, which I would like to call hypotrophy, which doesn't exist. We did talk about hypertrophy, which is enlarging the exercise. But we'll get into, I'll talk more about this when we get back to